Hello, my name is Sandy Adamitis, the social media director for the Page International Screenwriting Awards, and your host for the Writers Hangout, a podcast that celebrates the many stages of writing, from inspiration to the first draft, revising, getting a project made, and everything in between. We'll talk to the best and the brightest in the entertainment industry and create a space where you can hang out, learn from the pros, and have fun. Hey writers, it's Sandy. On the eve of Halloween, we have only treats and no tricks for you today because our guest is Niceole Levy, here to discuss her new book entitled The Writer's Room Survival Guide, Don't Screw Up the Lunch Order, and Other Keys to a Happy Writer's Room. Niceole has written on Ironside, Shades of Blue, Cloak Dagger, and S.W.A.T. She is currently a co-executive producer on Graymail, which will air on Netflix. Grab some of your favorite Halloween candy, settle in, and let's get started. Niceole Levy, thank you so much for hanging out with us on the Writers Hangout.
Thank you so much for having me. It's exciting to be here.
Hey, congratulations on the book.
Thank you. It's been really fun now that it's out in the world.
How exciting. Now, the name of the book is The Writer's Room Survival Guide. But before we start talking about the book, would you like to play a quick round of Would You Rather?
Sure.
Great. Okay. Would you rather live a peaceful life in a small cabin in the woods or a drama-filled life in a mansion in the big city?
Oh, drama-filled life in a mansion in the big city, for sure.
I love it. Would you rather have a tattoo of the title of the last script you read or the last TV show you watched?
The last script I read was mine. Does that count?
Yes, that counts.
Okay,
what would your tattoo say?
Oh, I can't tell you.
Oh, okay. Well, you're going to have to come back then.
Okay.
Would you rather read the book or watch the movie?
Watch the movie.
Would you rather never use social media again or never watch another movie again?
Social media, for sure.
Would you rather be stuck on an island alone or with someone who talks incessantly?
Alone.
Yes. Would you rather have Rambo or the Terminator on your side?
I mean, as long as it's the good Terminator, I pick the Terminator.
Would you rather own your own boat or your own plane?
Plane. I think I'd use the boat more, but the idea of being able to fly with my dog, because she cannot fly commercial, so a private plane would be
do you have
sweet.
A pug?
Yeah, I have she's an English bulldog.
So, okay, yes.
Yes, she can't do that. Also, she hates all other dogs, so God forbid there's another dog on the plane.
It would be one dog airline.
Yeah.
Would you rather be a character in an action-packed thriller or a romantic comedy?
Romantic comedy.
2 left. Would you rather hire a staff writer who never fails to write that perfect line of dialogue, or the staff writer whose first draft needs a minimal rewrite?
Staff writer whose first draft needs a minimal rewrite.
Would you rather have an extra $10K in your budget every episode or a shaded parking spot with your name on it next to the front door of the first floor writer's office?
Oh, extra $10K in my budget, for sure.
Well, I think our writers out there have just a little more insight into how you tick, Niceole.
There you go.
Okay, in your excellent book, again, The Writer's Room Survival Guide, which is on Amazon, correct?
Yes, you can get it on Amazon, at bookshop.org, or at the publisher's website.
And it is nice to get it from a more independent place, would you say?
I think, yeah, like I was so thrilled when I did not know about bookshop.org, but someone pointed it out to me, which is great because they support local brick and mortar stores. So
Can you say that again for our
Yes.
listeners?
Yes. It's called bookshop.org. And they share their proceeds, or I'm not entirely sure how it works, but like every time I make a purchase from there, it supports my local bookstore.
Oh, that's great. Curious, the cover. Were you involved in the cover art? Because how long did it take to figure out what to say on the stickies, which I love, by the way? That was, it makes you stop and look at the cover.
So the sticky, like the text itself was always there. That was always the subtitle of the book. The interesting thing was the publisher turned that over to, their designer. And when they sent it to me, they were like, this is our favorite cover that we've ever gotten. And I was so afraid I would have all these notes on it. And then I opened it up and it was fantastic. I literally had to fix 2 typos.
In your book, you say that building relationships is one of the best ways to survive the writer's room.
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. So much of the writer's room and your success or failure there isn't about the work itself, right? The work is important. It's important to impress your showrunner, how you pitch, all of those things, right, are important. But when you are confused about things, when you just flat out need help, when you have questions on drafts that you don't want to take to your showrunner, you need to have relationships with the people you work with, because those are your best resources, right? In some shows, there's someone who's kind of the designated mentor, someone who either at the showrunner's behest or on their own is like, hey, everyone, I'm here for you if you need anything. That's amazing when it happens. It should happen in every room. It doesn't. But it's still good to build a relationship with them so that when you come to ask for help, it's not all you ever talk to, right? You're not only coming when you have questions or only coming when you need help. You're stopping by in the
Yes.
morning and asking how their weekend was and, how are their kids doing, and just getting to know people so that you're a human interacting with another human before you're a writer asking another writer for help.
Get out of your shell a little and talk to people.
Mm-hmm. It is. And it's
No,
really important too, because if you run into difficulties in your room, right? If your room tends to the difficult to toxic scale of the meter, you need
mm-hmm.
people to have your back, and you need people that you can go to and be like, am I crazy? Was what happened today not cool? You have to build trust with people to be able to do that, and you do that right by talking to people. So it's a hard thing for some folks, but you got to do it.
Great. Another piece of advice from the book: make yourself invaluable.
Mm-hmm.
As a staff writer, how do you do that? Nobody expects a lot from you as a staff writer. And sometimes they don't even want you to talk. So, how do you make yourself invaluable?
Yes, you're absolutely right. You get everything from staff writers are seen and not heard to, staff writers start pitching on day one, right? So that part all depends on your room. But there are things that will come up in your room as the work unfolds. For instance, if you're on a show that turns in story areas to the studio and network, I guarantee you, if I asked for a show of hands of writers who like to write story areas, almost no hands would go up. And so if you have a knack for that, pithy, salesy kind of language, because that's all those documents are, right? It's selling the episode idea.
To
Offer to,
the powers that be, to
right.
greenlight. Yes.
Exactly. You want the studio and the network to sign off on it before you spend all the time breaking and writing it, right? So
Yes.
if you're good, just offer to take a pass at it. At worst, even if your number 2 or showrunner is going to do a full rewrite, they have something to start with, right?
What a
So
great idea.
yeah, it's offering to do something like that. If you hear, you know, assistants saying like, hey, casting keeps calling for sides, do you have time to do them? Because on some shows you can't use the actual script pages, right? There's too much NDA and security and all that stuff, so you have to
Right.
write separate sides. If you hear that and you hear that there's a time crunch, you can always say like, hey, do you want me to like take a first stab at a scene and I can send it to you, and then at least you're not starting from nothing. It's that kind of stuff.
Right.
because
That,
when,
yeah.
yeah, when you're a
The
staff
showrunner
writer,
has so much on their
yes.
plate.
Yes, and you lead me to exactly what I was going to say, which
Oh,
is your job as a person on staff, regardless of your level, is to make your showrunner's life easier, because your showrunner has 150 to 200 people, depending on them, for continued employment. So they are busy. And
yes.
so if you have a talent for that kind of stuff, what you'll find is you offer once or twice. And if you're even decent at it, right? You don't have to be great. If you're decent at it, people will start coming to you and being like, "Hey, can you take the stuff we talked about this morning and just write a quick story area draft and send it to me and I'll work on it?" And then you're saving that person an hour, 2 hours of time, which is invaluable when you are a number two or a showrunner.
And the showrunner loves you.
Yes, absolutely. It's finding, like, what are you good at? What can you contribute to the room that isn't just about the pitches going on the board? I posted about this on Twitter the other day because I think I forgot to mention it in the book. But if you're a person who's really good at remembering details from past episodes, be the room memory. When you're talking about a pitch and something about it's niggling you, and be like, "Hey, I think we said exactly the opposite in this other episode. I looked it up and this is the line of dialogue," so that you give the room a chance to pivot, right? Before we end up
That is
airing
great.
something very contradictory to another episode.
Paper teaming. When I was looking
Yes.
through the book, this kind of jumped out at me. Paper teaming. Can you explain that?
It is a term that, brings about a lot of disdain. The guild has really tried to sort of push back on it. That's not to say it doesn't still happen. And what it really means is, so staffing on a TV show happens from the top down. So usually when they get around to wanting to hire a staff writer, and it's usually only one, there's one salary left, right? To
Right.
cover staff writer fees. But say they met the two of us and they like both of us. And so they really want to have both our voices in the room. What they'll do is pitch the idea of making us a team on paper so that we're splitting a salary and they get both of us. And writers agree to it because it's a way to get in your first room, right? It's a way to
Yes.
get that job. And sometimes they'll try to compensate you for it by letting you write separately, or you end up splitting your script fees as well. But writers will say yes because it's a way to get your first credit. And I
Yeah,
totally
that's a
understand that.
hard decision to
Yeah.
make.
Yeah. And so that's why the onus is really on showrunners and studios not to ask it, because of course the writer's going to want to say yes, right? Because
Yeah.
they want a job. But
Yes.
if you're a solo writer and for your first season of television, it's, Niceole and Joe writing scripts together, it looks like Niceole and Joe are a team. And then my next
And
job, I have to be like, "Oh no, that was actually just, the show paired us up. I really write alone." So it can be a little tricky. And takes money out of writers' pockets. So we don't love it. I worked on 4 seasons of television in a row where all the scripts were team ups. So you could easily look at it and be like, "Oh, this is just a show where everybody writes together." And I wrote with all different people. So you get that. But if you see that I wrote
yeah,
2 scripts with the same person and everyone else is writing solo scripts, you're going to assume that we're a team.
exactly. The room can be just filled with landmines. And
Mm-hmm.
as a staff writer, say you pitching, it doesn't land, that dreaded silence. And later on, an upper level writer says the same thing, but this time the showrunner loves it. Shouldn't I, as a staff writer, call that out?
You should definitely not. You should
Okay.
definitely not call that out. Look, in a good room situation, the assumed default is that person doesn't remember that you pitched it earlier. In an unhealthy room, you will know that there are people who do that all the time. and someone will make sure the showrunner's aware that it's happening. So and so's always taking credit for everybody else's pitches, right? Like,
Yeah, you don't want to be
but
that person.
you don't want to be that person. But going back to the building relationships, right? I have been in rooms where even our support staff will have pitched something and it goes by the wayside. By the way, I apologize if you hear some loud like sound
Oh, I
effects.
love it, actually. I just heard it.
Okay. She
We're
just
keeping
suddenly
it.
got snoring so loudly. It's my dog, y'all.
What is the dog's name?
Her name is Ellie. She's an English bulldog slash French mastiff, and she snores like a sailor.
Oh, Ellie, welcome to the Writers Hangout.
um, but so say the assistant says kind of half-heartedly, like, oh, wouldn't it be great if we did the chase this way? And later someone pitches it. You can be like, oh yeah, wasn't that Nicole's pitch? If you know who it belongs to, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a way to sort of do it subtly and then gives the other person a chance to be like, oh, I thought I heard that before. Like, do it. Another thing that some people will do to avoid this situation is when they pitch, they'll say, I think someone else pitched this before, but like, and pitch it. And then you can say, oh, yeah, I thought that would work because X, Y, and Z, right? If it's your
Oh, I
pitch.
love that. Can you say that again?
Yeah. So if someone is repitching your idea and they frame it in that way of, I think someone else might have pitched this, and they go on and pitch it, you can say, oh, yeah, I pitched that because I thought it would work this, for this reason. And that way you're able to support the idea now that someone else is throwing it back in. Because sometimes what happens is because you're the staff writer, people really just didn't necessarily take it in, right?
Yes.
But then when the upper level writer says it and they're like, oh, that's a good idea. And if you have the chance to support it, even if you're not getting credit for it, support it because you already think it's a good idea, right? That's why you brought it up in the first place. And then maybe at some point it'll circle back to you. But TV is a team sport. And people who are always trying to grab credit are our least favorite people.
That is such brilliant advice, and that works in a writers group. Just a great lesson for life when you're in group situations.
Yeah, it really is. And it's, I think the thing about TV that some people struggle with is that it is so collaborative. Like you have to just be
Yes.
willing to lose sometimes for the good of the show. And,
Right.
and look, you
Yeah.
might pitch a great idea that everyone knows is your idea, and then you're not going to get to write it because
Oh,
of the
yes.
way the order breaks down, or, someone else is like, oh, that's my slot and I love that idea. I'm going to use it. You're helping the show be better. And it's
Right.
annoying when you pitch something you love and someone else is going to write it, but also that story that you cared about gets made. So you kind of have to look for that win.
Right. Do you think virtual rooms are here to stay?
I think some form of them is here to stay. There are a lot of showrunners, myself included, who will be very happy when we can meet in person again. Do writers' rooms need to be meeting in person again for 8 hours every single day? Probably not. I think we've all learned that we can still get the work done without that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what Zoom has opened up and what I hope stays around is opportunity and flexibility so that your writers can still have lives, right? If I fall in love with a writer while I'm staffing who lives in New York, who cannot pick up their whole life and move here in 2 days, right? Which is usually what happens when you're a staff writer. Get a job offer 2 days before the room starts.
Yep.
I can say, hey, we're going to set up an extra laptop in the room. You can Zoom in. That's how we'll make it work till you get here, right? Because if I love that writer's writing and I think their voice is important to the room, I can make that accommodation.
Yeah.
I think for writers who, are parents, right? I've been in rooms with parents who have to stay home because their nanny's sick, and there's no one to stay with the baby. You can let that writer call in on Zoom, and then they don't have to feel like the bad guy for missing the day. And they can just hop up and go when they need to take care of the kid. There's a humanity in it that I think we didn't have before that I hope sticks around, because there's no reason to make it impossible for people to balance their life and their work.
Yeah, I like that. I like that idea that it will probably just unfold and be a mixture.
Yeah, I think so. Because a lot of people do like the flexibility for sure. And
Oh, LA traffic.
yes.
I don't know if the world out there really understands how bad the traffic is here, and
Mm-hmm.
that, it could take you up to an hour and a half to get to the writer's room. And you
Exactly.
have to do that twice a day.
Exactly. Right. And for me, as an upper level writer now, there's so much I could be getting done for the show in the hour and a half that I'm driving. So I could be
Yes.
reading drafts. I could be giving notes to other writers. I could be doing all that stuff. So I think like a hybrid, sort of my ideal plan now is like in person for 3 days of the week, but 2 days where it's up to you. You can come into the office, you can work virtually, you can do whatever. Cause I don't think my room would necessarily need to meet every single day. They will have work to do every day, but do they need
Hmm.
to necessarily be in the writer's room every day? I don't know.
Yeah. And the network and studio save money on snacks.
Indeed. They save a lot of money when people are meeting virtually, which I think is everybody's fear. Is
Yeah.
they're used to saving that money now, but I
Hmm.
haven't I have the writers I know who have wanted to go back in person have been able to go back in person. So I don't know how much resistance there's going to be.
Yeah.
They may
It might
never pay for lunch again, but
They don't like paying for lunch. That is
they
so
don't.
true. It may just end up showrunner's choice. How can a newer writer ensure that they're getting the most out of a virtual room? Because again, you're not popping your head in the morning and saying hi and chatting at the table and having private conversations.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely more challenging, right? Because you don't have that in-person bonding. And so one of the things I recommend, if someone in your writer's room hasn't already started a text or WhatsApp thread with everybody on it, start one. Recommend it, see if the support staff will set it up, because it's it's never fails that people will send hilarious things, right? And like, did you guys see this headline this morning? And like everybody can chatter and talk, and it's a safe thing because it's just our room, right? You can just communicate with each other. And it's also a fun place to, like, while you're in the room, if someone's like, oh, I have a picture of something like that, and they can just drop it in the thread, right? Instead of everyone trying to save stuff on Zoom and upload it.
Right.
And it opens up a flow of communication that is really helpful. I was in a room during the pandemic that did something that I also thought was really fun and lovely, because if you run an efficient room, you have some time, right? You'll know how much you need to be in the room every day. And what we did was have Thursday morning coffee hour. And so every Thursday, our first hour of the room was just talking, was just hanging out and talking
Oh,
to each
wow. I
other
like that.
and getting to know each other. And we would, we had one writer who was great with coming up with questions that they would throw out, and we'd all have to answer the question. And it's just a way to get to know the people you work with. And you miss out on that when you're not in person. In person, that stuff just happens organically.
Yeah, it's kind of adding the humanity back in.
Yes. And then also, I would say, as a staff writer in a Zoom room, hopefully someone's reaching out saying, hey, I'm here, if you have questions. But regardless, if you start to feel like you really click with a couple of people on staff, just be like, hey, like at some point, could we set up a chat, just the two of us? And, I'd love to get to know you better, ask you a couple questions about the room. And unless someone's a jerk, they're going to say yes. And so that's a way for you to start building a little bit more one-on-one relationships with people.
Another Really good idea. Love that. One of my favorite things about your book is that you encourage writers to ask questions when they don't know the rules of the room.
Mhm.
Can you give us 3 room rules a staff writer should figure out on day one?
I would say three things that are really important to know on the first day are A, are you expected to pitch, or are you in a room where staff writers are seen and not heard? You want to know that very quickly, because if it's the latter and you throw out a pitch, you're going to get a look that's going to make you feel very uncomfortable. And if no one tells you outright, when you take a break, ask one of the upper level writers. Like, because you're going to probably be quiet in the very beginning anyway. So then find someone and be like, hey, am I supposed to pitch? I just want to be sure. Like, I don't want to step on any toes. Really good showrunners usually tell you what they expect on the first day about what time we start, what the routine's going to be, that kind of thing. And the second you see someone dishonor that, you know they're in trouble, because your boss has told you on the first day, this is what I
Yes.
expect. I had been brought up in the network writing programs, which was like basically be the first person in the door. So I was early every day. I still am early every day of my writing life. And so I was on a show where I was still in the lower level ranks, but not a first time writer anymore. And a staff writer was coming in like 10 minutes before we started. And I was like, I mean, I feel like you might want to come in a little bit earlier. And then later, another writer and I were working on a pitch with this same staff writer. And we were like, okay, well, let's meet in the morning. And this writer was like, okay, well, what time should we meet? And the two of us were both, well, we're both here at 8:30. And it was this like, uh, oh, you come in that early? And it was like, yes.
The penny dropped.
Because, right, that's your time to have coffee with people, to get to know people, to do all those things. But also,
Yes.
you never want to risk being late. If your showrunner says the room starts at 10, you are always in the building no later than 9:30. So,
Yes.
whatever time they say the room starts, you are early, always, because the last thing you want to do is be late.
People
Um,
notice all of this. Is there pressure not to decorate your office?
It is superstition. In the same way, Jerry Rice always had to have an exact way his pants fit or he couldn't play football. There's people who are superstitious about these things. And there are some showrunners who, on first year shows, get very nervous if people start decorating their office because they feel like it jinxes them. And so just, ask before you start putting stuff up, like, hey, is it cool if I personalize my office a little bit? And, you might get a like, oh, no, he's going to freak out. Don't do it. Or you'll get a like, dude, it's your office. Do whatever you want. I've mostly run into being teased about what I put up as opposed to people really being like, don't decorate. It's been more like, I cannot believe you put that up in your office. And I'm like,
Nicole, who teased you and what did you put up? And I will go beat them up for you. But tell me, what did you put
Um,
up?
well, I'm going to withhold some specifics, but I hilariously put up a poster for another show, at my first show that my showrunner definitely did not like. And he would literally tease me and be like, I can't believe I hired you and you like that show. And I would just be like, too late now.
Sharing how
Mm-hmm.
much you feel a writer has to share. Aren't you obligated to bare your soul? Because that's what you're being paid for.
It
And when
is
I'm talking sharing, it's like for stories, for
right.
maybe the writers or our other listeners out there that don't understand that writers share so much in building a story.
Yes, a lot of our personal stuff ends up in stories that, the casual viewer won't be able to identify whose stuff it is, but we all know. And look, here's what I think the reality of this is. If you are using a part of your life in order to get the job, right? When I was working on procedurals, the fact that I was a police dispatcher in my former life was part of the reason that someone was going to hire me. So, yes,
Fascinating.
I'm definitely putting on the table. I will share those stories with you. I will talk to you about policing. I will talk to you about the good cops I've known, the bad cops I've known. That is my investment in this show. I think where it gets tricky, and look, the same thing comes with identity, right? If you are a historically underrepresented writer and they are hiring you because of a particular demographic that you fit, the expectation is you are going to come in and share some stories to help, because we have a Black character. So Nicole's going to tell some stories in the room. And that's all well and good. That is a fair expectation. What I caution people about is if your stories are going to go to a place that is hurtful to you, you
Okay.
need to reconsider how you're going to share that story. I think none of us owe anybody our trauma. None of us owe people opening up a vein in the room that we are then going to have to recover from. So, for instance, if I was meeting on a show that dealt in, it was a family drama, and at some point in the course of the family stories that we were breaking, the issue of alcoholism came up. Now, that's a thing I have personal experience with. Do I want to share every story I might have about that? Probably not. But if it came to a point where there was like, oh, this detail would be really helpful though, here's how you can do it and protect yourself. Oh, I actually knew someone growing up and they went through this situation and here's what happened. Right.
Perfect.
Or I
Yeah.
saw a documentary and I can't remember the name of it, but it had a story like this, whatever it is, and distance it from yourself so that what you're not doing is giving the room information that you will be uncomfortable with them having later.
Right. Nicole, have you thought about writing a book?
The book I
Since
did not want to write, that book.
yes, in my research on you, you did not want to write this book.
I
And
didn't.
thank goodness you did. It is such a good
Well,
book and it's packed packed full. Not only just look this happens, but you can pull back and give advice, and even when you give advice, it's 3 or 4 examples to fit a myriad of personalities. I mean, bravo, you did an amazing job on this book.
thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I tried to be very mindful, right, about like everyone's personality is different. Everyone's comfort level is different. And what works for me, right? Like again, just like saying to my showrunner, well, it's too late now. You already hired me. A lot of writers would not have felt comfortable doing that, especially on their first job. But it's
Mhm.
my personality. And I got along great with my showrunner. So it was fine for me. So people are going to have to find the thing that works for them. And it felt like if, thank goodness for all the wonderful writers who shared information anonymously because they gave some added perspective to all of this. And
Yeah.
hopefully something in there pops out to writers who, my method doesn't work for them, but maybe someone else's idea in the book does.
Yes. Let's say I'm a staff writer
Mm-hmm.
on a hot new cop drama, and it's called Ellie the Bulldog.
Okay.
Okay, we're 3 weeks in, and I notice a big logic problem with what the co producer is pitching. I don't have
Mm-hmm.
the solution, but I spotted it. Shouldn't I speak up? I mean, why not point it out?
So, a hard and fast rule about the room is don't point out the problem if you don't have a solution. You may find that you just really want to call it out. You'll find that usually someone who's got more tenure than you will point out the same issue that you're chomping at the bit to be like, that's a problem, that's a problem. But nobody wants to be the writer in the room who gets called out without a solution also being pitched. But what you can do is in between, right? On a break, something like that. you can even go to the writer who's pitching the thing and be like, I really love that pitch. I was wondering though, like, is this going to be a problem? And say it to them alone.
Oh, good.
Or you can, if it's like end of the day and the room's breaking up, the next day you can say to one of the co-EPs, like, hey, I was really mulling on the board last night. And are we worried about this? And do it alone, like one-on-one. Don't do it in the room. If you have a solution, even if it's not necessarily the one that's going to be on the board, right? What
Right.
you can say is the classic, like, yes, and I think it would really help us if we actually had the clue trail reversed, because that's going to help us fix any logic bumps that might come up. And people will be like, oh, great. Okay. And like, do it, and you've got a solution, or you found an artful way to point out the problem. You pitched a solution. Maybe your solution's not the right one, but now the room is alerted to the problem.
That sounds great. I mean, you wouldn't like it if someone was doing that to you in your pitch. So
Exactly.
that is it's perfect. And again, I love your solutions to that situation.
I have been in that situation on both sides. So,
and it'll probably come out in the wash anyways.
yes.
Yeah.
Because look, almost always as a staff writer, what you'll learn is to trust your instincts, right? When you're like, I don't know if that works. At some point, someone with more authority is going to be like, I'm not sure that works. And you'll realize you were right. Right. Mm-hmm. But it's not your job as a staff writer to keep poking holes in everybody's.
Yeah. If you don't have the solution, just sit back for a little while.
Yeah.
Niceole, for you, starting out, what was your biggest misconception of what it meant to be a working writer?
Probably how much of the work isn't actually writing. I think, especially because I came in, on broadcast television, and I think I didn't really consider how much the producing work comes into it. I didn't think about how much time you spend breaking story. It's really, if you did a ratio, you spend way more time breaking all the stories than you spend writing them.
Niceole, where can we find you out there on the big old internet?
At present, I am on Twitter and Instagram, both at the same handle, which is at Niceole Cookies. And Niceole is spelt Niceole, because it is some weird French spelling of my name that my great grandmother saddled me with.
It's so pretty.
Thank you. It definitely stands out. I usually, people ask all the time if it's a typo. That's where I'm at if you're looking for me on social media.
Niceole, can you give us the title of your book and where we can get it?
Absolutely. The book is called The Writer's Room Survival Guide. You can find it on Amazon, at bookshop.org, or at the Michael Wiese Publishing website. And I hear tell the audio version is going to be available before the year is out, but I don't have the specific date. So I'll keep everyone posted.
Niceole, thank you so much for giving us your time, for writing this book.
Thank you. And thanks so much for having me. This was super fun.
That's a wrap for the Writers Hangout. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, like, and thrive. Till we get to hang out again, keep writing. The world needs your stories. The Writers Hangout is sponsored by the Page International Screenwriting Awards. Executive producer, Kristen O'Verne. Producers, Terry Sampson and Sandy Adamitis. Music by Ethan Stoller.